uh, uh, a diet prescription into a plate of nourishing, delicious food. She spearheaded the Smith's Center project to create Soul Savory, a cookbook of healthy African American and African heritage foods. She co created and presented Smith Center's workshop for oncology dietitians and chefs on culinary translation and cancer care. She's a founder of Eating for a Lifetime, a consulting business dedicated to teaching individuals and professionals about healthy, supportive eating. She's a co-coordinator of the Smith Center Patient Navigation Training in Integrative Cancer Care, a senior clinical consultant for Cancer Choices, a free evidence-based website providing information and guidance to patients with cancer, their caregivers, and healthcare professionals on integrative cancer care. So, Ms. Dr. Polk, welcome and thank you for being with us. This is going to be one of those that most of us probably don't have a whole lot of experience with. So we're happy to have you with us and anxious to hear from you.
Oh, thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you. At the Smith Center retreats, I'm always, because I'm an oncology nurse and a chef and a musician, I'm always introduced as a chef nurse. And so it's a new profession, and I welcome others to try it out. It's lots of fun.
Okay.
So
Laura, before you start, I want to tell everybody how I got introduced to you.
Oh,
Because I'm one
yeah.
of the fellows of the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine, and you presented to our group, and that's how I guess got connected with you. So Laura has good stuff for us, especially the ones who are involved in cancer care. So I am involved with cancer care. That's why I got really like hooked on your lecture, and thus we have you now today. So this is really a great pleasure to have you.
Oh,
And just
my
a
pleasure to be here.
little background. What is the Smith Center for those of us who don't know where it is? Where is it?
Yes. So Smith Center for Healing in the Arts is a community support organization for people with cancer in the Washington, D.C. area. And Smith Center for Healing in the Arts was founded in 1996 when it became the first and only program outside of Commonweal, which puts on the internationally known cancer help program retreats. So Smith Center became the first and only group to be able to put on those retreats for people with cancer. They're week long. And out of that grew, because we were based in the Washington, D.C. community, we also began to add other programs. We have a fabulous offerings of programs which all went virtual during the pandemic, and many of them have stayed virtual because it's been able to serve people outside of the DC area. And I teach cooking classes there in person, and I'll be teaching one in just, in a couple of weeks, actually. So check out their programs because you don't have to live in DC to take advantage of a lot of them. And we're focused on healing, the art of healing, and we mostly serve people with cancer. And we believe that healing is innate in everyone, and that is something all our programs aim to support and look at people's choices in healing, one of which is the lifestyle practice of eating well. And so with that, I will get into my presentation. I said I sing. I have a video. Sorry, it's not super clear when it gets expanded on this page, but of my trio called Trifocal, singing a song, and it will have a special guest appearance. I won't tell you who the guest is, but you will know soon. So can you see this, the video?
Yes.
Okay, and I think we decided we could hear it well. So here we go.
Ready, guys?
Can you hear it okay?
Come from a happy chicken. Honey brew up some coffee. I got a new treat for you. Gonna make butter, T-bone steak and eggs. Whip up the bran and the egg beaters. Honey, don't make me beg. Give me those bread muffins.
Old bread muffins,
Old bread muffins.
old bread muffins,
Put 'em in the oven
a lifelong loving old bread muffins. Well, now, more I know that a muffin alone won't keep that doctor away. So here's my solution, let's join that revolution, and we'll start a brand new day.
We'll start with oat bran crunch for breakfast. Then it's oat bran bread at noon. We'll have oat bran tofu, meatless loaf, and have a bathroom bill for two.
Old bread muffins,
Oat bran muffins.
old bread muffins,
Put 'em in the oven for lifelong loving oat bran muffins. Now, ladies and gentlemen, ever since we wrote this song, we have become true believers in oat bran. Say amen. Again. And we believe that if he had used it, Elvis Presley would be alive and with us today. He'd be here getting acupuncture and psychotherapy. Wait a minute. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis is in the building.
old friend of mine, old friend of mine, old friend of mine, old friend of mine. Don't worry at all, 'cause it lowers my cholesterol.
Oh my God.
All right, there you have it. The king.
Terrific.
Thanks. Yeah. So Elvis did know about oat bran muffins, but he liked his deep fried. And I often start my talks at the retreats with that song to impress upon people that we have lost the fiber and many other things in our food these days, the fibers of life. And so we're going to talk about real food and how to help translate a diet prescription that you may prescribe onto the plate. And I'm going to start my, is the slideshow showing up now? Can you see the slide?
We're good.
Okay, great. So after the prescription, how do people get the food to the plate? And I call that, and a few of my colleagues call this culinary translation. I have no disclosures. I know this is for CE, so I need to tell you that. What I hope will happen after this next few minutes is that you'll be able to define both culinary medicine and culinary translation. You'll be able to describe the practical aspects of what culinary translation is in cancer and how it can be woven into your integrative lifestyle medicine practice, and describe some principles of health supportive food selection and preparation. And since I've already talked a little bit about Smith Center, but I worked for 15 years in every area of oncology possible, acute care all the way to hospice. And I often heard oncologists as well as oncology dietitians. Excuse me, that's my dog. Let me let him out. I've often heard the oncologists and even oncology dietitians tell people when they say, what should I eat? They say, well, it doesn't matter what you eat, just don't lose weight. So eat things, and the cookbooks that they were given, even from the National Cancer Institute, had these very high calorie, high sugar, high saturated fat foods in them. And so I took a chance and took a leap and went to left my job and went to culinary school in New York at the Natural Gourmet Cookery School, which is designed to train chefs to be health supportive chefs. And I went through that kitchen door. And then when I came back, I moved into my work as it is now with Smith Center and with Cancer Choices. And I've been doing this work ever since. And so what I found out at that school and then coming back to work is that it indeed does matter what people eat. Nourishment matters. Now, I'm not talking to you tonight about culinary medicine, but I wanted you to understand what it is and where culinary translation fits in with that. So there is actually now, as part of lifestyle medicine, a branch of that called culinary medicine, and it's evidence-based, and it not only involves physicians, but other professionals, and it blends culinary arts with nutrition science and medical education. And a good program should have hands-on learning through healthy cooking, and it should be taught in a teaching kitchen, either in person or virtually. And I just heard a wonderful lecture that was put on by the Georgetown Culinary Medicine Program. Dr. Nathan Wood from the Yale School of Medicine, and in that Department of Culinary Medicine, did a great presentation. And if you can, I didn't have a chance to find it yet on the Georgetown site to see if it was recorded, but any presentations by Dr. Wood would be worthwhile. So I am going to talk to you about culinary translation. And culinary medicine should and does often include culinary translation. So it's one thing to know all the nutritional facts you can, all the medical applications of food in medicine, but you still have to have a way for the person to take what you prescribe to them to eat and put it on the plate in a way that's affordable and practical. So culinary translation does that. So we take the person's diet prescription and convert it into these practical pieces of what I like to call nourishment, which includes nutrition, but is much, much more. And it involves this whole continuum of what's involved in getting that food to the plate. And my colleague, Ruth Fair, who co-developed and co-taught the culinary translation course that we did at Smith Center, we came up with this definition. So we want to highlight foods not only for health benefits, but for deliciousness, because a lot of people don't believe that if it's good for you, it's going to taste good. And if it doesn't taste good, then I think it's not truly good for you. And so we go beyond nutrition to talk about nourishment. So we focus on the practical aspects of nutrition by taking that dietary advice. Like if you tell someone you need to eat greens, then we'll teach that person 5 ways to prepare it deliciously. We have to account for their lifestyle, their culture, and their budget. And we want to balance beyond the nutrients. We want variety, color, flavor, texture, the amount. We want to meet people where they are, so it's not a sudden dietary revolution. Instead, we help people make changes slowly and in a way that makes sense for them. And we help to rehabilitate, literally enhance their taste buds. We clear up misconceptions, again, about healthy and delicious can be in a daily partnership, and that healthy eating is accessible and affordable. I teach people these 4 basic principles. There are no good or bad foods. Foods just give information. So for instance, soy, as we learned in our class, it's a bean, it's a complete protein, it's the only bean that is. And it used to be called the king of beans, and maybe in some circles it still is. Well, it might be health supportive for some. I have a sensitivity to soy, which I discovered in culinary school. And if I eat it, the information I get is not pleasant. And so I take that information and I use it to decide whether or not I'm going to eat soy. And actually, I continue not to eat soy because I still get bad repercussions from eating it. I tell people you can't eat dogma. And for people with cancer, people come out of the woodwork to say, oh, have you heard about this diet, or try fasting, or do this or do that. And they should upon people, and people can't and shouldn't eat dogma. Michael Pollan beautifully says, eat food, real food, not too much, mostly plants. And if people remember that one sentence here, or these three sentences, then they're doing well. And then eat your vegetables. So of that real food, vegetables should make up the bulk of what people eat. Let's see, my mouse is going a little crazy here. Another thing I want people to think about is that your kitchen can be a pharmacy. At the retreats, I have people who come to me. I say, look, if you're not feeling well, and it wasn't necessarily from what you ate, but it might be that something I can give you from my kitchen pharmacy can help you to feel better, come see me. And so I help people learn how to use the fork and spoon to become an epigenetic engineer, as Gene Wallace calls it. I mean, for instance, look at this. These are all culinary spices that inhibit NF-kappa B, which is inflammation's major switch. So all of these can be used to make the food delicious and interesting and give it a cultural name tag, but it can also help inhibit inflammation at the same time. I mean, I think that's just beautiful. But people say, hey, Laura, but if food is medicine, isn't it going to be hard to take, or isn't it going to taste bad? And as I say over and over, nourishment also means the food is tasty and you can weave it into your own budget and your own life. So if your patient has decided to change the course, I'm just going to give you some of the information I pass on to patients so that you can take it and make it your own. And you will get a copy of these slides, by the way. So some guiding principles are dietary plans have to be affordable, employ readily available foods, and fit people's lifestyles if they're going to be successful. And then the other guiding principle I use is the 8 principles of food selection, which we learned at school in very practical and delicious and real ways. So these principles guide me and can guide anyone when I'm planning a menu for the retreat or for my family, when I'm standing in front of the refrigerator and trying to decide what I'm going to have for lunch, when I go out to eat, when I fix my shopping list. So I try to see how many of these principles I can fit in when I serve and cook food. So 8 principles are whole, quality, fresh, frozen, fermented, canned, or dehydrated, natural, seasonal, local, in harmony with tradition, balanced, and delicious. And I'm going to go over each of these quickly. Whole food, that's eating food that nature provides with all its edible parts. For instance, eating an apple, the whole apple with the skin on, is an example of eating a whole food. Drinking apple juice is a fragmented food because all you have is the juice and a lot of sugar in there, and not the fiber and not those phytonutrients that come from the skin and the inside of the apple. Eating a whole food could mean, if you enjoy eating chicken, for instance, that you eat the chicken with the bone in. But it doesn't mean you eat the whole chicken all at once. But I do take those bones and I will use them in a broth to make stock. So I'll take the leftover bones, I'll put it in a bag in the freezer, and then as I get carrot peels and onion skins and other things that do well in a stock, I'll throw it all in a bag, and when it gets big enough, I'll make some chicken stock. But I tell people that when you cook the food with the bone in it, it's going to have more flavor, it's going to be moister, and you're going to cook the minerals of the bone into the meat itself. I talk to people because they want to know, what are whole grains? So I talk to them about the anatomy of a whole grain, and one part of that is I sang about in that song, oat bran muffin. So you have the outer bran layer, you have the endosperm layer, and you have the germ layer. Now, think of germ, it's the first 4 letters of the word germinate. So when you have a whole grain or a whole bean or a whole nut, and you soak it in water, just like you were going to make bean sprouts, for instance, you soak it and then drain the water off. And then it's put it in soil, you put this bean in soil, it's going to sprout. So it's the germ that sprouts out of that grain or bean or nut and grows into a plant. So the whole grain is actually full of life potential. So where are the nutrients? Well, the nutrients in the bran and the germ, it's 80% of the fiber and lots of your nutrients. You've got the phytochemicals in there, you've got the PUFAs in there in the wheat germ, and it doesn't have a lot of calories. In the endosperm, so that's what you have left. Like if you take the bran and the germ off brown rice, you're left with white rice. It's mostly starch, it's energy rich, it's got little fiber, it has some protein in it, but it's not super high in nutrients. When you take a grain and refine it, you lose, in some cases, up to 95% of these things that are naturally in the whole grain. And then, of course, what do? They enrich it, but they don't put the bran back in. So the key take home I tell people is that you take all the parts of the grain, and it's like a symphony orchestra that is in harmony. And when you eat this whole grain, this synergism and harmony is passed on to us as nourishment. Some examples of whole grains would be quinoa and millet. Millet's not just for birds, it's delicious. Brown rice, oats, lightly pearled barley, bulgur wheat, which is used in a lot of Middle Eastern cooking. And I'll tell you something I learned, and I had to pay $10,000 for it in '97. It's probably about $30,000 now to go to culinary school. But if you take a carbohydrate containing food, let's say it's brown rice, and you soak it overnight with a tablespoon of some sort of acid food, yogurt, kefir, vinegar, lemon juice, that's going to make it more easily digestible. It will increase the mineral absorption from it. It also tends to lower the phytates in the grain, and it makes it cook faster, and you need less water. A simple thing to do and create such a wonder. I talk to people about what whole foods are, and that here are some that can lower glycemic load and our inflammation. And these foods show up all over the place when you're talking about plants and a plant-based diet and the value of it. And so most of your fruits and vegetables can help with lower glycemic load and inflammation. Your nuts and seeds, your beans. And by the way, I mentioned quinoa a little while ago. Quinoa is the only grain that's a complete protein. So it has all the essential amino acids. And of course, I mentioned earlier that soybeans are also a complete protein. A second principle I teach is quality, fresh, frozen, fermented, dehydrated, or canned. We used to say in the school and favor fresh food, but now the way they freeze food and can food, it preserves a lot more nutrients than it used to. So there's no reason not to include that in one's pantry. So when possible, choose fresh, because fresh can be the most delicious. Dehydrated food and naturally pickled or fermented foods also leave most of the nutrients intact. However, frozen and canned, as I said, is okay, especially when you can't get quality fresh foods. Here are beets. I was in the grocery store one day checking out, and I had some beets with the leaves on them too. And the lady said, checking me out, said, well, what's this? And I said, it's beets. She goes, oh, I thought that's what came in a can. So a lot of people just don't know what the food looks like before it got processed or canned. Another principle is natural. So you want to eat food that's raised or grown as naturally as possible with not pesticides or chemicals or hormones. And you want to eat it as close to the way as it looked when it came out the bush or out of the ground or off the tree. For instance, eating a baked potato with the skin on it versus eating potato chips. Although I am known to eat a potato chip or two, although you can't eat just one if it's Lay's. I just jokingly tell people orange Jell-O is not a natural form of eating oranges. People say, Laura, is organic really better? Well, I would say for a lot of reasons, if you want to reduce the number of chemicals coming into your body, harmful chemicals, then yes, it's better. And there's even some evidence that organically grown food may be more nutritious than their conventionally grown counterparts. And that's because of the miracle of when you let a plant fend for itself and it's stressed in nature or by pests, then it is more resilient and it begins to put out these protective chemicals into the plant. And then when we eat those plants, that's passed on to us too. So as I mentioned, some of the most resilient part in the life of the plant is when it's germinating and putting out nutrients in the leaves or whatever to protect itself. If you ever wondered why quinoa is bitter, it's because that's its own natural pesticide. That's why you really have to wash it well. So asking if organic is really better. On the left here, you see a chicken liver that's nice and shiny and a beautiful color. On the right here, this is a chicken liver. So the one here on the left it was said to be pasture-raised chicken. This one said all natural, no hormones, no antibiotics, and it was fed with plant-based diet, vegetarian diet actually. And this liver here on the right shows me that chicken's liver still had to work hard because of what came in through the diet. So it didn't eat a natural diet that it's used to, and it ate probably still some chemicals. So I tell people, it's not necessary to always eat everything organic, especially when you think about the fact that some foods are never treated with a lot of chemicals and pesticides. So the EWG, Environmental Working Group, every year they put out a new Dirty Dozen and Clean 15, and this comes from the app. You can get an app on your phone. And I tell people, if it's on the Dirty Dozen list and it's on my shopping list, I am going to buy that food organic if I can, and can afford it, or I'm just not going to get it today and I'll do something else. So I would never pay organic prices for asparagus, because as a gardener, I know that asparagus don't need to be sprayed. And I use natural fertilizers. If it's processed, you need to learn to read the label. And so I have people, look at this jar of Jif peanut butter. What should be in the ingredients? And of course, it should be peanuts, but look at this ingredients list. And I tell people, if you can't pronounce it, you got to renounce it. So the second and third ingredients are sugars of different sorts, and a lot of hydrogenated oils and things you can't pronounce. And then I show them a jar of organic, all natural peanut butter, and it has just one ingredient. So it's really important to teach people to read the labels and understand what it is they're reading. And don't be fooled. Oh my goodness, look at this packaging on these cookies. They have the plant, the little leaves here. It's a plant-based snack. Well, if it's being made from flour and grains, it's plant-based. But what does that mean? And so they make it look like it's healthy because it's plant-based and it's back to nature. But if you look on the other side, at this long ingredient list, you'll see it's not whole grain. It's refined grain. It's got sugar in it, a couple of different kinds of sugar in it. So you still need to read the label. Just because it looks like it's healthy, you still need to read the label. Garrison Keillor once said, anyone who eats a fresh, ripe strawberry cannot say anything caustic or cruel for 15 minutes thereafter. So remember that if you have to have maybe a confrontation with someone, feed them some strawberries first. Eating food that's locally grown, that does a number of things. First of all, it didn't have to travel far, so it's lower environmental footprint. When you have to make something travel a long time and you want it to get there fresh, they may put preservatives on the food, so that's another thing. And also, eating food that's locally grown is good for your local farmers. And if you go to a farmer market, you can ask them what were their growing practices. Some people aren't certified organic, but they grow with organic methods. And they might even be able to tell you how to cook it. So lots of ways to get food locally grown. And some of the farmers markets, I know the one in DC down the street from Smith Center, they participate in the SNAP program and senior citizen discounts. Another principle is to eat food that's in season, because if it is in season, it helps you to adapt to your environment better. What do I mean by that? Well, there was a woman who came to a retreat that we put on. It was in the winter, and she was quite thin. I can't remember what cancer she had, but she had gone down to a place in Florida where she ate raw foods and ate very healthily, felt great, but she was also in nice, warm Florida when she did that. And she wanted to continue to eat raw foods when she came home. She lived up in Pennsylvania. And so, and she came to the retreat, and I have a winter menu. So I'm doing lots of winter root vegetables and dark leafy greens and maybe barley in the soup. And she's wanting to eat raw foods, but she doesn't feel very good. when it's cold, eating raw foods. And I said, that's because those raw foods that you're eating are not grown in that, they're not in season. They're not warming you. They're making you feel cold. And so she began to eat more in season and felt good. And then when it was warmer weather, she went back to eating the raw foods. So they take better care of you when they're eaten in season. Here's some Swiss chard, which tends to grow well and longer than spinach does. So you have a very short spinach season, but Swiss chard tastes a little bit like spinach. And people might go buy it and they come home and, oh, this is beautiful, and they put it in a vase, but they never learn how to cook it. So then it becomes a microbial experiment. So do ask your growers, how do I cook this food? Another principle I really love is in harmony with tradition. So people might say, I'm not used to eating beans and whole grains. I eat mostly refined foods. I don't even know where to start. And I explain to people that your body is set up for digestion and enjoyment of a food somewhat based on the food of your ancestors. It's sort of in your genetics. So talk to somebody in your family or in your community who cooks the way they cooked in the old country, and ask them, what beans did you eat? What grains did you eat? What did you use for seasoning? What did you use as the fats and oils? And that's a good way to land in on foods that might suit you better. So if you are from Northern European descent, then your beans may be like Great Northern beans. Your grains could be things like rye, buckwheat, those sorts of things. So find out that, and it's a great way to relate to people who cook in the old ways. And also consider the food rituals and the emotional attachments and how you can bring that in. And it's important to ask what are the food traditions of your faith and culture? And at Smith Center, we put integrative oncology navigators who were breast cancer survivors into their local churches in the African American and the African immigrant community, where they served as navigators. And they wanted to do a project that would help the health of their community. And they wanted to know if they could do a soul food cookbook, but is soul food really healthy? And I said, oh, yes, the roots of soul food are very healthy. And so what they did was they canvassed their church members and their community members and said, turn in your recipes of your favorite soul food, or in this case, we had food coming from the different islands in the Caribbean, food from African countries. And then we said there were a few things that we wouldn't accept in terms of the recipes. And then I and another chef looked at them, and we made sure we kicked them up a notch in terms of health value. And we made sure every ingredient in the ingredient list could be found in their local community grocery stores. And then we tested the recipes. I had people in my neighborhood donate some money, and we fed them for 3 days, and they gave comments, and we adjusted the recipes. And this book is wildly popular. And if you're interested in getting a copy, you can write to Smith Center or go to its website, smithcenter.org. And for a donation, they'll send you a copy of the book. I love oldways.org. They have courses that they are already packaged, ready to go, and you get the course from them and you teach it or co-teach it. And they have it on Mediterranean diet, African heritage diet, Latin American, Asian, and vegetarian and vegan diet. I can't say enough about the quality of these programs. I have done the African heritage diet, had a wonderful time doing it, as did the 20 people who attended the class. I went on the Portuguese Coastal Camino this fall and fell in love with the food. So I want to tell you, if you're excited about a certain culture of food, invite your friends over so you can see. I had my friends come over and we cooked this paella outside, and then we shared the meal together. And it's just wonderful to be able to share food with your friends. Another principle is balanced. And this is a dynamic process, because what you need when you're growing, you're having a growth spurt in childhood and adolescence, or in pregnancy, or in illness, or if you're very athletic, your body might require different foods at different times. And you have to be able to accommodate and give it what it needs. And this, again, is where you can't eat dogma. You have to accommodate to what you need. And it's a healthy balance, not a balance for nourishment. So a variety of foods that have complex carbohydrates, protein, and healthy fat. A rainbow a day. So I tell people, choose fruits and vegetables from the colors of the rainbow, because the deep colors, that's where all those different phytonutrients are. And I do tell them that green pistachio ice cream does not count as your green for the day. You want a balance for textures and tastes and cooking methods. I went to the home of a client who wanted me to help teach him how to cook and make his food taste better. And I found out he boiled everything. And of course, that was not going to make for a very tasty and interesting diet. So I've worked mostly on teaching him different cooking methods. You want to balance for quantity, and I'll say a little bit more about this under eating awareness. The New American Plate by the American Institute for Cancer Research. It's a great website with lots of different recipes and lots of evidence on nutrition and exercise in cancer. And so what you see, you want about 2/3 of your plate to come from plants. So you've got broccoli, tomatoes, you've got that looks like maybe a mixed quinoa. You've got more vegetables over here. And then if you wish to have animal protein or fish, then that would be no more than 1/3 of your plate, or often you hear the size of a deck of cards. But you could make this entire plate vegetarian by having maybe quinoa and black beans, and that would make your protein. And then you would have these other plants on there as well. So people say, oh, I just heard chocolate is good for you. And so Americans love to hear good news about their bad habits, as Dr. McDougall says. But we might end up overdoing it. We tend to do that in this country, is that you hear good news about that for that dark chocolate. So now I'm going to eat a whole chocolate bar every day. And no one particular food is either a demon or a panacea. And everything in moderation, including moderation. And finally, but most importantly, among the most important principles is it has to taste great. It has to be delicious to be truly healthy. And whether I'm teaching people with cancer or the general public or professionals, the classes always include some demonstration and tasting of how you build flavor in the food, especially to accommodate some of the taste changes that people with cancer have, the maybe sometimes they have pain or burning in their mouth. So you have to help them work around all those challenges. If people are ready for a change, I give them a few resources. I'm sure you can think of even more. Add to Cancer Choices. We have 7 lifestyle practices, and we have one on healthy lifestyle that gives people some ideas of how you start to make change and you make a change stick. If you need help and support putting nourishment on your plate, please check out the Anti-Cancer Lifestyle Program. It's free. They have modules on diet, on stress reduction, on movement, and a number of others. But that's a great resource to send your patients to. I mentioned Old Ways already. That's another great resource. And if you want more help with putting nourishment on your plate, the AICR has the Healthy 10 Challenge. So it's an interactive 10-week program to help people move into a more health supportive diet. And it's Cancer Choices, which is an evidence-based website that provides guidance and information on integrative oncology. If the person signs up for the newsletter, and that person could be you, it doesn't have to be necessarily patients, you can get free access to Rebecca Katz's very famous online cancer fighting kitchen course, which otherwise is a $90 value. So there's another great resource. And also in Cancer Choices, and a number of other websites have this, Savor Health, which has a personal nutrition assistant who through AI can answer some of your questions, but if there are questions that Ina cannot answer, then she will send you on to a real person dietitian to answer your questions. I've included here a slide, and actually didn't make it in the first slide handout I sent to you, Melvin, but I'll send the revised one. Some resources in case you want to check out culinary medicine, including Harvard's online course. And also, it's not just about the food, it's the eating experience. There's been research that shows that you provide the same foods, but they're plated in one situation, they're more attractive on the plate than in the other situation. And in one situation, the person is eating their food in a less harmonious environment, or it's just drab, or they're eating by themselves. But the more that you can do to change how beautiful the food appears and the eating experience, the more nutrients the person gets out of the food. So nourishment through eating awareness, and this will be the last little part I'll present, and then see if you have any questions. A lot of this comes from Ayurveda, which is the medical system of the yogic system. And so eat in a harmonious and happy environment, minimize disturbances while eating. I had a friend who had heard that his goats had gotten out of the pen, and he quickly got up and ran from the table. And that's when he first started having angina, which eventually led to him having open heart surgery. But he was in rest and digest mode, and he quickly got up, and that switched him into fight or flight mode. And so he didn't have what he needed for his heart, because everything was being devoted to his digestion. Try not to eat when you're emotionally upset. Favor eating while you're sitting down. And check your hunger level before you eat, and then eat to 3/4 full, which is about, if you cup your hands together, it's 1 cupped handful. And the reason is your stomach can hold about that much chewed up food before and still have room for digestion, because your stomach is like a pot and it finishes cooking the food for you and getting it into a form where it can go into the intestines. So you don't want to overfill that pot, because then not everything is going to cook, right? And some of it's going to come up into your esophagus. And wait to eat until after the previous meal has been digested. People just douse themselves with liquids at meals. And I recommend people drink small amounts of warm or room temperature liquids when eating. And it's best not to drink cold liquids. And take several minutes after the meal to rest. And take your main meal at midday. That's when your digestive fire is at its peak. And aim to eat your last meal at 7 p.m. and then break your fast the next morning at breakfast. This is really fasting, right? So this is kind of what we were designed to have, a daily fast from after the evening meal until you take your breakfast, and eat what you enjoy. And I do this practice, and I recommend people sit down at the table. If you have a chime or a bell, ring it, and breathe 4 slow, deep breaths before you eat. And then you ring the bell again if you have it, and then you eat. It's unbelievable. And I think probably saying a blessing has a similar thing. So what it does is begins to put you into the rest and digest mode. So get involved in the prepping and the eating and the yum and the because one cannot think well, love well, or sleep well if one hasn't eaten well. Okay. So there are a few minutes for questions. Have there been questions in the chat? And Melvin, do you want people to put questions in the chat, or the how would you like that to go?
I don't have any questions in the chat, actually. So,
Okay.
So there are questions.
you have emails?
Yeah, but let me read through the chat here. So Mary Elaine wants to do a bit with you. She's a singer and a baker. Dr. Bill will sing if I play the guitar. So that's probably a future show that you and Mary can tag
that
it
would be
into.
great. Yeah.
And then Gino has a question. Is it okay to include oats on the diet? And if not, what is a good alternative for that?
So oats are a whole grain. I see no reason why not to include it, unless the person has celiacs. There might be, and then they need to consult with the dietitian they're working with, because there can be some wheat grains that can get into the oats, and that might cross-contaminate it. But even if it is just oats, there is I'm not sure what's in the oats. I can't think of it at the moment, but some people with bad celiacs may have a cross reactivity. So oats, it's a whole grain. I suggest people eat a variety of whole grains, and if people like to eat quinoa or millet, you can also cook that like you would oatmeal and eat it for breakfast. And oats can be used in cooking. But I don't recommend just eating one type of whole grain. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, but oats are a great grain to include.
I think, Laura, one of the bigger mysteries of oats would be the glycemic load of this. So there's a lot of controversies behind, the big discussion about should we promote sugar, carbohydrates to cancer patients.
Right.
And yeah, so again, on my end, with my experience with cancer, oats are definitely okay, and we prefer the steel cut oats. So we're not going to be giving you the Quaker oats that has all these extra flavoring. all of these artificial
Sugars.
additives in it. But oats is definitely a good choice as a low glycemic type of food choice. So I
Yes.
don't know if that you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, maybe that was it. So I do, in an expanded lecture to people with cancer, I talk about that very question: does sugar feed cancer? And it's not as simple as that. But your refined carbohydrates, your high glycemic load foods, so refined grains would fit in there, but even brown rice has a relatively high glycemic load. But there are ways you can take this. So if you take brown rice and you grind it into a flour, it will have a higher glycemic load than if you ate the whole grain brown rice. And that's because when you start grinding up these foods that are carbohydrates, it makes it more quickly absorbed into the and change to glucose. So just the very act of grinding them into a flour increases the glycemic load. And there are things you can do to decrease the glycemic load. So if you eat your carbohydrates also alongside, well, first of all, with whole grains and other fibers, you eat it with some protein, some fats, all of that's going to slow down the transit. So you're not going to get that big, glucose rush. And I do explain to people how, in their language that they can understand what happens in insulin resistance. And part of the issue is not only if you have all this insulin being released in because the cells are resistant to insulin, insulin also has a growth factor. And so when it gives the glucose to the cell, it offers this growth factor as well, which we don't want to be doing with cancer. But if you have all this glucose running around and the normal cells are resistant to the cancer cells will use it as a favored form of energy. And then the insulin says, hey, well, how about a little growth factor, and not realizing what it's doing. So we explain that to people. And, if you cook potatoes and then cool them so you create a resistant starch, it'll have a lower glycemic index. If you cook pasta to al dente as opposed to really, really soft, it'll have a higher glycemic load than. And also I talk to people about eating sprouted grains and beans because that will have a lower glycemic load if it's been sprouted, that is soaked overnight. I mentioned that to you, adding the acid if you want. And that will lower the glycemic load. And when you eat sprouted grain bread, for instance, none of those were ground up into a flour. They were sprouted, they were smashed, but not ground up into a flour. So those kinds of breads, they have complete protein because they combine the grains with the beans and nuts. And also because it wasn't ground up, it'll have a lower glycemic load. So we teach them a few things like that. And at the retreats or the classes, they get to eat that food too, to see that it can be delicious.
And that was a good point that you brought up here, that insulin really, we thought, and glucose is the culprit, but it's IGF-1 really is one of the bigger factors on why these cancer cells grow faster than normal, because their receptors are actually 100 times compared to a normal cancer cell. And thus, I don't know if you've heard of this, that growth hormone is not definitely suggested for people who has cancer because of this reason as well. And so that's basically also relating to and the conundrum of sugar and cancer. And as you know, you've seen this before, that you go to an oncologist's office, right? And what do they have in the waiting room? Donuts and actual coffee with creamer and sugar. So
Yeah.
think about that on how people run business that way. I'm not saying that's deliberate, but for sure that's something that you're going to be seeing out there in the regular oncology office. But I think that's where that question was coming from on on how carbs really are something we're very confused about that in terms of oncology care. But it's a good thing you gave good points about that one. Maria, how can we make this lecture viral? We have patients listening today. Well, I think we got this recorded, and we could, if it's okay with you, Laura, we can share it to
Yeah.
our
Yeah, and
colleagues.
if people want it more tailored, like for instance, the International Macroglobulinemia, Waldenstrom's Macroglobulinemia Foundation, I tailored it, by looking at what are some of the symptoms that people with that disease have, and where food can help. So I can tailor lectures as well. This one was more tailored to a professional audience and how you can translate even the language about food to people. So yeah, feel free to contact me. My contact information will be on the last slide, but it's laurapole1@gmail.com.
Well, Laura, you're kind of an international star today, because some of our attendees here are from other countries like the Philippines. So you're reaching out as far as Asia here. So we
Oh,
have
wonderful.
providers there watching you and now following you.
Yeah, well, I'm super excited because now very near me, a Filipino food restaurant is opening up, and I can't wait to go. I think I have this vision of having people in a class who have foodways from all sorts of countries coming together and taking turns and talking about their food and preparing it.
Well, tell us about that. We don't know if we have the healthiest food to present to you, but we'll let you be the judge. All right, Robert, how do you feel about digestive enzymes?
Okay. Well, there are some people who could probably benefit from it. And by the way, supplements is not my thing. I can help people think about ways but actually I'll tell you this, at the retreats, a lot of people who come are not used to eating a mostly vegan, plant-based diet with all that fiber. And so we provide some digestive enzymes, particularly to help people with digesting beans. So that might be one thing to consider. I myself, I've had a lot of challenges because of food sensitivities and an unknown for 17 years mold exposure. And I had to take digestive enzymes. And it's helpful. Of course, people with pancreatic cancer may require them. And I'm not the expert on that. And there might be somebody here who's better equipped for that. But what I can tell people is there are certain things like under eating awareness that is going to enhance the digestion of your food. And also, I am super serious about the quantity of food you put in and how well it's chewed. So you begin to digest in your mouth with your saliva. It has enzymes that digest particularly carbohydrates, which interestingly, a person who has emphysema or otherwise COPD, they have a hard time with the CO2. And so if they're eating a lot of carbohydrates, the first thing that could begin to raise their CO2. But anyway, you start to digest in your mouth. Well, actually, when you see and smell the food, your stomach is getting ready. So you need to chew well and not overeat, because your stomach literally is a pot, and some food needs to be digested and cooked even more in the stomach. And when you overfill a pot, some of that food is going to get to your intestines and it wouldn't have been well digested. And also, as I mentioned earlier, some of it will come up in your esophagus. So there are many things you can do to enhance the digestion of your food. There are certain foods with enzymes, like if I have a papaya, I'll take the seeds out and, give people the papaya seeds, a few papaya seeds to help with digestion. So
Right.
and all those things about eating awareness, all of that's going to help digestion.
I think, Laura, this question comes from the theory that proteases and lipases, which are pancreatic proteolytic enzymes, actually have been seen to break down cancerous cells and even strengthen the immune system. So I have this encounter of using a specific test that actually tests for supplements, and one of them includes digestive enzymes. And I think this is also something that can be done clinically. And behind this, again, this theory, we're really talking about high doses of enzymes, such as lipases of around 30,000 to 75,000 units per meal, will actually be also helping with digestion, but also helping cancer killing. So that's why, for me, on my end, clinically, we do test for this in terms of being part of the supplement plan of a cancer patient. I don't know if Robert, that was what you were gunning for. All right. Well, Tatiana, are there any differences in foods recommended with certain types of cancers? For example, GI cancers or thyroid cancers, or like specific diet for the diagnoses?
Yes, there could be. And also it's not just the specific cancer, but the treatment that the person is getting. So the head of Smith Center, the founder, was diagnosed with stage 4 colorectal cancer, and had a wonderful physician, and they were able to put her in a state of no evidence of disease. And she feels like the work of the retreats kept her alive for an additional 7 years. But she, partly due to her treatment, she could not eat the high fiber diet that we had. So she had radiation that involved the colon. And so she would be up all night when she initially tried to eat that diet. So some of it has to do with what treatments they had and what sort of long-term and late effects that might have affected their ability to take in the food, assimilate, digest it comfortably. The other thing, for instance, with colorectal cancer, and some of this has to do with prevention, but high fiber diet, and also a certain microbiome balance, certain probiotics might even be useful in colorectal cancer, either prevention and sometimes with respect to surgery and afterwards. And if you want to go to cancerchoices.org and look up two sections, one is on your microbiome and the other is on probiotics and prebiotics. I think that would be very helpful. And oral cancers, certainly what people have eaten. Well, alcohol we know is involved with a lot of cancers, probably more than we have ever thought. With colorectal cancer, also a lot of red meat is a problem, and it's not. I think they thought for a while it was the fat maybe, but they think it's the heme in the red meat. So it's not just beef, but other red meat that may be problematic. So
That's the good point that you brought out there, that in relation to probiotics and also cancer, I think I was having a discussion with Dr. Bill a few days ago about this, that on my end as a clinician, I can give out probiotics and I don't even have any contraindications for it. It's just like, hey, everybody can benefit from it. But during my education with the fellowship, I actually got an awakening that one of the contraindications of giving probiotics would be, one, is acute pancreatitis. Obviously, you won't want to give anything per orem for an acute pancreatitic episode. Number two would be immunocompromised patients. So that's why applying this concept to cancer patients, you would see that a very debilitated stage 3 or stage 4, or that got so much radiation, surgeries, and chemotherapy, and now assessing that their immune system is so down, can actually be leading to a septicemia, which was actually seen on studies if given probiotics. That's why caution on this for practitioners out there, that this can definitely be done early and more preventative in a cancer patient. So that's just something that I was surprised about septicemia of a probiotic.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, I mean, acromantia, which it's all the rage now, and it may be useful in certain cancers, but it's also been linked to a higher risk of glioblastoma. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so the jury is not out on probiotics. I mean, I think the jury can say they're probably helpful, and it's really important to take care of and balance the microbiome. And we know that with immune checkpoint inhibitor therapies, certain probiotics and certain microbiome considerations are important for response. But overall, just to say, I'm going to give you a probiotic, and they're probably going to be more specific than we realize. I wouldn't just do it willy-nilly.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, related to this question, so I think one of the bigger questions would be, how about a breast cancer be given soy, as you mentioned about it? Because as we all know, there's like phytoestrogens there. And also, what are your thoughts on now talking about soy being prominently GMO based or organic? I mean, what are now you have all these conundrums related to specific cancers and contraindications of. We had a speaker about this, and we kind of riled up the crowd when Hiko was kind of defending GMO soy. Again, we just want to get your take on this.
Yeah. Well, my take is I don't recommend getting GMO soy. I don't think we yet know enough about it. I mean, and I thought Europe was stricter, but when I was over there, they were not strict as I thought they would be. But I don't think we know enough about what GMO is doing to us. But one of the thoughts I heard is that, your microbiota, they're kind of like plants, right? And so GMO, the glyphosate, it kills weeds. And so it may affect these sort of plant species in you. And then what is going to happen to them and their function? They have so many functions in our bodies. So we think maybe it doesn't affect us directly, but it's affecting the microbiome. So, I mean, I just as soon get it non-GMO, in my opinion. And then I do a special piece of a lecture on soy, particularly if I'm talking to people with breast cancer. So it was just a couple of studies, small. I don't even think they were clinical studies. I think they were preclinical that suggested soy may foster the growth of estrogen-dependent tumors. And then they're saying, and that's because it's a phytoestrogen. But they don't really understand what phytoestrogen means, and it does not act the way xenoestrogens act or estrogen per se acts on cancer cells. So then it was like doctors telling women don't eat any soy at all. And then when you got into your large studies, in the women's health study, for instance, they were not seeing that it was problematic, and that it didn't interfere with tamoxifen, and it tended to make aromatase inhibitors maybe even more effective. So I suggest that, and where they did find harm was when you had fragmented soy, like soy isolates in capsules, or eating soy protein isolate. So the thing what I recommend is that they eat whole sources of soy. So that would be tempeh. It would be miso. It would be, I mean, even tofu is not whole soy because they take out the fiber when they make the soy tofu, but it's still, it's still a food as opposed to being a processed, fragmented soy protein isolate. So favor whole soy foods if you're going to eat them. And I have a list, a table that talks about amounts and servings and that sort of thing. But if you want to read more about soy and breast cancer, you can also go to Cancer Choices and look at our breast cancer handbook.
Well, that also kind of to be more specific about that area of soy, yeah, for us, as we see cancer, we do recommend soy, but as you said, it should be a whole food type of soy. And to be specific, again, these are the isoflavones that are in there, specifically genistein. So there's so many, but genistein is actually one of the bigger protective phytoestrogens for cancer patients, and even for female related cancers. These are something that we do promote, and we see this also in testing that it does help lowering down the cancer load, as I mentioned to you, this specific test. Okay, next question would be for Maria. Most elderly Filipinos are afraid of beans causing arthritis. Can you give some tips in cooking beans?
So can you say a little more about where that fear comes from?
I think this is more related to, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Meliora. This is the, uric acid when you eat, turns into gout, of course, and beans is kind of like a big culprit for this. I know beans are not the only one, but there's in the Philippines, we kind of have this, I guess, belief or correlation. I don't know if it's here in the US too, but I think that's where it's coming from. Or even when you eat beans, right? Lectins and how you remove the lectins from these beans. So I don't know if that's where she's coming from, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm actually more familiar with nightshades being problematic for some people with arthritis, but and certainly if you have gout, my boss can't eat. There's hardly any protein he can eat. He has to be really careful about that. So, and you mentioned the lectins, and I know Dr. Gundry is kind of, made that really popular, that concern. But I've talked to some oncology dietitians who seem to know what they're talking about. And they say, in general, that's not an issue. You want to make sure the beans are cooked well. I also recommend, if you're going to start with whole dried beans, that you soak them and you pour that water off and then cook your beans. But kidney beans are sometimes some of the worst culprits in terms of the lectins, but it's more when you don't cook them enough. And I don't know who wants to eat a kidney bean that's not cooked well, but you really need to cook it till it's very soft.
Unless you want to lose a tooth, right?
Right. And it'll give you a pretty bad stomach ache if you don't cook it. But I recommend soaking your beans if you're starting with dry beans, and then pouring off the water and then cooking them well. And again, everything in moderation. You don't need a big old heap of beans. mixed with your grain to get a complete protein. So it's more like maybe a couple of tablespoons would be okay, mixed in with, maybe 3/4 of a cup of cooked rice. So that would be my recommendation if anybody else, and the other thing is, I had to find out by doing an elimination diet, what bothered me. And within a week, I felt so much better doing this food elimination diet that an arthritis problem I had in my jaws since 85, and this was in 2007, I discovered this. It went away in a week with the food elimination diet, and that's how I found out what I was sensitive to. And so I suggested people see what information they get from eating beans. And if it increases their joint pain, then maybe it's not the right thing for them.
Right. Well, another way to remove lectins would be boiling and also pressure cooking. If they are concerned about the lectins in that question. Robert, do you think it is okay to have fruit with vegetables and meat for dinner, or should fruit be eaten alone?
That's a good question. And I know some people who, I think it's called the Fit for Life group. They recommend that you eat your fruits and your high carbohydrate foods separate from your proteins and your fat, higher protein and fat. And I've had it explained to me, and it seems to make perfect sense. But I know some people who they can eat all of it and it doesn't bother them, and other people it does. So I think it might depend on what's the glycemic load of the fruit. So berries tend to be less problematic, and you might be able to eat it with a meal, but I would say, again, that's something for you to try for yourself. The Fit for Life would say eat your fruit like about 30 minutes or an hour before you eat the other components of your meal. And just see how it goes. It could be that when you eat all of that together and you have issues maybe with yeast and you tend to get gas, or you have problems with, now I'm blanking on it, FODMAPs, then eating all of those kinds of foods together might be problematic. So I would just suggest people try. I had separated everything out, and then I just started eating grains again, oats at breakfast, and I can eat it with berries and apples, and I have no problem with digestion.
Well, with regards to this, Harvard Health Letter actually suggested that eating fruit after every meal, so this is not related to cancer, but actually had proven to lower down body weight. And this is a huge study done by Harvard, and they didn't even have a specific recommendation on what type of fruit. They just made sure that after a meal, and they wanted to prove that fiber actually will buffer the absorption of excess fat, excess carbohydrates. So, I mean, in relation to weight loss, this is probably a good strategy for people who wants to have dessert after a meal. So instead of getting your piece of cake, your chocolate chip, grab a banana, right? Grab an apple. So that's probably a better way to go with that.
Yeah, maybe when you send out the handouts, you can send a link to that study, Melvin.
Oh, yes, of course. We can definitely do that. I guess this is my own personal question for you. So, what about your thoughts? So we just spoke about carbohydrates, right, and sugar. What are your thoughts on fruits increasing blood sugar for cancer patients who are worried and getting that glucose so high that it could rev up their cancer?
Well, they're doing research on, I guess the extreme would be the ketogenic diet, so you wouldn't be eating fruits. at all. And I don't think everybody's turning toward the ketogenic diet as sort of a cure-all, and it's not necessarily going to help everybody. So I think that has to be individually decided. But backing up to fruits, I would say if you're going to eat fruit, you need to eat the whole fruit. It's better to eat the whole fruit. There are some fruits that are going to be higher in sugar, higher glycemic index, but the context in which you eat it could reduce the glycemic load of the fruit. So again, eating the whole fruit as opposed to the fruit juice, eating it. So if you eat an apple in the afternoon for a snack, eat it with some nut butter spread on it, for instance, or the famous apples and cheese. So when you're doing that, eating it with the fat and the protein, and also you've got the fiber, that should slow it down, So I would say eating fruit alone could be maybe more problematic in terms of raising the glucose and that sort of thing. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. Well, in our approach to cancer, as you did mention, that the fiber is the more important thing to think about when you're eating fruit, because there are people who would say, "Hey, I'll just drink the juice. Right, juicing." The problem there is you're losing the fiber, though
That's
they
right.
do have this cleansing effect that they're trying to go for. But the problem there is you're losing the nutrients of the fiber,
Right.
and right.
And
So yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't know, everybody can't afford maybe can't afford a Vitamix, but if you have a good blender that you blend up your whatever it is you're going to juice, you're drinking a Whole Foods juice or liquid, but keeping the fiber, you'd be better off. So it sometimes takes a good blender to make that palatable. And Keith Block, who's sort of like, I guess he's getting to be the grandfather of integrative medicine, integrative oncology, he has a whole part of his plan that relates to diet. And he is not a fan of juicing, even like carrots, because a carrot has a pretty high glycemic index, especially if you're just doing the juice. So beware of what you're juicing, if you're doing greens, but even the greens, I suggest that they be parboiled a little bit, or so that they're cooked a little bit, because in some people, especially those who tend toward hypothyroidism, it could, make that worse. So yeah, if you do whole foods juicing, you're not going to have the same issues if you extract the juice from the fruit or the vegetable.
And we have to always remember that on studies that people with low fruit intake to begin with really had more of like a twice of a risk of developing
Right.
cancer, right? Than
Yes.
those who does not even take it. So that's
Yeah.
why taking fruit in general, real fruit, not all these roll-ups or all of these juices, sweet juices or concentrates, will actually be cancer protective. So
Yes.
again, in general, you won't lose with real food, and also in moderation, as you just mentioned.
Right. I remember reading about there are different iterations of the Mediterranean diet depending on the country. And one of the countries they were looking at was the Spanish and their take on the Mediterranean diet. And theirs was higher in fruits than, I don't know, maybe Italy. But they both were equally effective in terms of reducing cancer risk and, reducing, some of the other risks that comes from eating a more standard diet. So the fruit was not harmful and probably helpful because it's loaded with phytonutrients.
Right. Well, Laura, thank you for knocking out all my questions and also in the
Oh,
chat. And
yeah,
this was a good
pleasure.
crowd that you're riled up in here. And hopefully next time you can give us a live performance of your Oat Brand song so
Yeah,
we
yeah.
can be all
Well,
entertained.
you really need to hear my rap on cheap fills. But that'll be some other time. And the person who also performs, yeah, just get in touch with me. Maybe we
Oh,
can do.
Elvis Presley.
Yeah, yeah. And I will send you a revised slide handout.
Okay.
All right. Well,
We'll put
yeah.
it up on our website when we get it. And Laura,
Okay.
can't thank you enough. And Dr. Nario, thanks for taking over the moderation here. Next week, we have Arlen Hill from Biotics Research.
Yes, SIBO. That's going to be a good one.
About SIBO. We're going to have to make it a requirement that they have to sing.
Yeah, Laura's kind of set the bar
Yeah,
high.
we need
Laura, please come join us every Tuesday too.
Yeah, really. Write a song about SIBO.
yeah.
It's not a placebo. I don't know. Okay. I'm going to sign off, you guys. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. It was a delight, and thank you for all the information and what you do.
You
We're
sure thing.
really good.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Dr. Quinn, we got anything from the research group or Dr. Tano? You're muted.
Yeah, we didn't meet on Saturday. Everybody had other stuff going on, but we're going to hit it again this Saturday.
Okay, great. Okay, and anybody have any conferences coming up? Any talks? Anything of interest? Dr. Nario, before you go, what's the tip of the week from the the Integrated Medicine Fellowship?
All right. So we just had a good lecture about the food here. So one thing that I found, so as you would notice, the fellowship teaches us practical stuff for integrative medicine. We're not using the peptides, we're not using stem cells here. So one thing that actually was spoken about by Laura is something in relation to organic, right? So we discussed how do we clean our food if we can't afford to buy organic, or if that's the only choice you have. And as you know, the dirty dozen, the majority of or I guess contaminated produce is there would be it's almost 95%. And this is like strawberry, spinach, and kale. So there are two things that they taught us. One is baking soda, and one is apple cider vinegar. Baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking soda per 2 cups or almost 500 mils of water. And then, of course, you soak your fruits there for 15 minutes, and you have to basically manually rub it off and soak it so that it can actually be removing the pesticides properly. So it dislodges it. And this is actually the abrasiveness of the manual removal and also the alkaline status of that specific solution does the work to remove the chemicals. For apple cider vinegar, it's 1/4 cup. This doesn't have to be organic, so don't buy those brag ones that are pretty expensive. It's almost about 60 mils per like 1 liter of water. And that's where you dump all of your vegetables and fruits. And again, you rub that as well. And this is, as we know, apple cider vinegar is a natural cleaner. It's a home remedy known for its antimicrobial properties. But on studies, baking soda is actually showing more promise than apple cider vinegar. So, but if you want to do both, that's fine. But apple cider kind of beats it to the punch. And if you don't have those, what? Sorry.
You combine them.
That's overkill. That's what they say. You can do that, but you can just choose one. That was a question that was also brought up. But if you want to do that, and yeah, kind of you want to eat your fruit later and wait for that long, that's fine. But they always say just do one and you'll be okay. If you don't have any of those two, running water, and also, of course, heat can remove these pesticides. And also, another manual, practical way to do it, peeling or trimming the outer skin of these fruits and vegetables that actually has all these pesticide contamination.
You know, if you wash off the pesticides, it doesn't taste. They don't taste right. You know that, don't you?
I know that's where the good stuff sticks.
How about
You know,
what they spray on stuff to make them look shinier? You know,
It's like shoe shine on your fruit.
I mean,
yeah.
you know,
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Just want to know if I could ask a CME question.
sure. Let me,
So this is Adam Crouch. From last week, I went to log on to the link there, and the program on CBD didn't come up. I couldn't find it. I emailed the company, and they emailed back and forth and back and forth, and I just didn't know if there was a different number to use on the link.
I will check it, and if it's wrong, we'll correct it. Okay. It was
Oh,
Well,
he's
thank you.
just here. Dr. Quinn is the presenter.
Yeah. I received a couple of emails from people for the slides and I sent them to them, but I didn't do anything with the CME.
yeah. Okay.
Well, Bill,
oh.
I sent you an email. I didn't know if you happened to see it on or maybe it went to your junk file, but anyways, I was trying to find out what link to use because I just went to this one now, and because you'd mentioned it was $30, and I think they're charging $50, unless there's a different arrangement.
Shouldn't be charging 50, that's for sure. So if they're charging,
Well,
50, it's news to me.
okay.
Okay.
So that's why I was checking it tonight while we're all together, because I went and logged on, and it looks like it's going to go to it. It wants payment first, $50. I haven't done it yet, but I wanted to ask about last week's.
All right. I will check on both. Okay.
All right.
As far as I know, it's still 30. Okay. No one told me that they raised the rate 103.
The Great Lakes Learning Group said they couldn't find last week's lecture for CME.
Got this week's. Okay, Laura Paul. All right, continue during first name.
But thanks for looking.
All right, I will check it out. Okay, I'll let you know.
All right, sir.
Okay, no worries.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, one quick comment about the foods and the organic thing. All of that stuff to do on the outside is wonderful. That's going to help some of the pesticides, fungicides, and all of that. But the soil is one of the problems too. If it's not grown in organic soil, that the products are uptaking that stuff, and it's going to be inside.
Right. So one of the thing there is definitely it's not going to be 100% pulling out all of these toxins. It's basically minimizing, especially being a more, I mean, not everybody can afford organic. So these are just little ways that we kind of say to our patients and impart to them. But
No,
you're
that
right.
makes
I do agree
that
with you.
makes
There's a lot of
sense.
arsenic-filled soils now out there that cannot be removed. You just need years of removal for that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But any effort is better than nothing, that's for sure.
Right.
And especially on the dirty dozen. Oh boy. That has to be organic, or you got to use, you know what, like some of those people, they have those fruit and vegetable sprays. I don't know if you guys talked about that, if they're any good, you know, that you can buy those
Oh,
things.
that's a good question. No, we haven't gone into that. But that's a good one that'll bring up.
Which one was that?
Yeah, some of them, if we're done with the CME, I know Traders sells a fruit spray.